Arizona Territory. 1879. The sun beat down hard on the cracked earth outside the small wooden chapel in the town of Redwater. And inside, everything fell apart. The lace on Sylvia Danner's wedding dress had torn clean through at the hem, snagged on a nail sticking out from the chapel's front step. It flapped uselessly now, dragging in the dust as she stood frozen before the altar, blinking through tears, trying to understand what had just happened. Her groom, Nathaniel Kess, had dropped her hand the moment the preacher said, "If any man here objects," without waiting for another word. Nathaniel's boots echoed down the aisle as he turned and walked away, jaw tight, eyes cold. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs. Her aunt clutched her pearls. Someone whispered, "He ran." Someone else said, "Left her like that, in front of everyone." Sylvia's hands trembled. The preacher closed his book quietly. She turned, slow and stunned, facing the crowd with her heart in her throat and her dress ripped at the bottom, white satin now stained with dust. The tight braid pinned at the back of her head felt like it was choking her. She stepped off the altar, each footstep louder than it ought to be. And that was when she heard the boots. A steady, solid rhythm. Not like Nathaniel's sharp retreat. These were slower, grounded. She looked up. Near the back of the chapel, in the last row where the light from the open doors spilled across the floor, stood a man in a weather-worn hat. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, and boots covered in the red dust of the desert trail. He looked like he had not come for a wedding, more like he had just ridden in from somewhere far and hard. His eyes met hers. "I'll love her," he said. The chapel went silent. Not a breath moved. Only the wind outside, brushing over the dry grass and pushing against the chapel doors. Sylvia blinked at him, her breath hitching. He stepped forward, taking off his hat. His hair was dark, thick, and tousled like he had spent days on the trail without a mirror. He had a scar across his left cheek, not ugly, just real, like someone who had seen trouble and gotten through it anyway. "I am sorry," Sylvia said, her voice barely working. "Do I know you?" He nodded once. "Name's Elias O'Connor. I was hired to haul lumber up from Bisbee. Got in this morning. I was not planning to walk into a wedding, but I reckon I know a good woman when I see one." She stared at him, heart pounding, mouth dry. "You do not even know me. I know you were standing up there ready to give your heart to a man who did not deserve you. And I know what it feels like to be left behind." People began to whisper again, louder this time. Her aunt hissed, "Sylvia, do not speak to him. You do not even know where he came from." But Sylvia's eyes stayed locked on Elias. He looked steady, not just brave kind. The kind of man who did not waste words. She stepped off the last stair of the altar, her fingers gathering the torn edge of her dress. "You said you would love me." "I did," he said, quiet but sure. "And I meant it." Sylvia almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so impossible. "Why?" He swallowed and stepped closer. "Because I would not have left you up there." The sound of a child's soft cry broke the moment. Sylvia turned. From the side pews, a little girl with dark curls and wide brown eyes ran toward her. Sylvia bent down and caught her. "It is okay, Lucy," she whispered, holding the girl tight. "It is okay now." Elias watched as Sylvia scooped the child into her arms. Then a smaller boy, maybe 3, wandered up behind the girl, holding on to the edge of Sylvia's torn dress. "This is Liam," Sylvia said to him. "They are mine." Elias nodded. "I figured. They are not his," she added quickly, glancing toward the door where Nathaniel had disappeared. "Nathaniel wanted to marry me, but not them." "I see." Elias looked at both children, then at her again. "You do not have to explain." Sylvia felt her breath shake. She was still standing in front of the altar, in a ruined dress, both her children clinging to her, and a stranger, a cowboy with dust on his boots, looking at her like she was not broken. "Why would you say something like that out loud?" she asked him. "In front of everyone?" "Because maybe you needed to hear it," he said. "And maybe I needed to say it." Lucy peeked up at him from her mother's shoulder. "Are you a cowboy?" Elias smiled gently at the girl. "I reckon I am." Sylvia looked at him, really looked this time. His hands were rough. His eyes were tired. But there was something in them that made her feel steady again. Like even if the rest of the town turned their backs, he would still be there. "I do not even know what to say," she whispered. "Then do not say anything," Elias said. "Let me help you out of here." She hesitated. Then she nodded. Elias took off his coat and handed it to her. Sylvia wrapped it around her shoulders, covering the dirt and torn lace. She held Lucy in one arm, and with her other hand, she reached down for Liam. Elias opened the chapel doors, letting the sunlight in. The four of them stepped out into the heat of the day, and for the first time in hours, Sylvia felt like she could breathe. Outside, the town still buzzed with gossip, but Elias kept close to her side, eyes scanning the street ahead. He did not touch her, but he stayed near, like he knew she needed space but also needed someone close. They walked together down Main Street. Lucy rode on her hip, Liam stumbled along holding her skirt, and Elias kept pace. When they reached the edge of town, near the stables, he turned to her. "My horse is here," he said. "I will walk you home, if you want." She hesitated, then nodded. They walked the winding dirt road to her small cabin on the edge of the desert bluff. The house was plain but clean. The fence was half fixed. The porch sagged on the right side. Elias helped Liam up the steps, then turned to Sylvia. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I am not expecting anything from you. I just want to help." She looked up at him, holding Lucy tight against her chest. "You do not even know me," she said again. "I know enough," he said, "and I would like to know more." Sylvia stared at him a long moment. Then she nodded. "Come inside," she said. "It is hot out here." Elias followed her up the steps. Inside, the air was cooler. The children settled in, and Sylvia brought water from the pump out back. And as the sun sank low behind the red rock hills, Elias stayed. He did not leave that night. And Sylvia, for the first time in too long, did not feel alone. The evening brought a soft hush to the land, the kind that came only after the wind died and the desert gave back the heat it had hoarded all day. Sylvia lit the oil lamp in the kitchen, the glass chimney catching the flicker as she set it on the table. Elias stood by the doorway, waiting like he was unsure if he'd been invited to stay or had just imagined it. "Sit down," she said, tying her apron over the faded blue dress she'd changed into. "I've got beans and corn cakes left from yesterday." "You don't need to feed me," Elias said, but he pulled the chair out anyway, slow, careful not to scrape it too loud on the floorboards. "I didn't say I needed to," she replied, bringing over 2 tin plates. "I said I would." He nodded, hands resting on the table's edge. His nails were rimmed with dirt, and there was a thin patch worn through the elbow of his shirt. She noticed but said nothing. Lucy sat beside Elias, sneaking glances at him like she was trying to puzzle him out. Liam had fallen asleep against the wall with his thumb in his mouth, a blanket tucked under his chin. "You come through Redwater often?" Sylvia asked as she spooned beans onto his plate. "Not until now," Elias said. "Usually run lumber to Fort Bowie or haul freight from Tombstone north. This time, the man in Bisbee paid extra for a quicker run. I didn't plan on staying past sundown." She gave a short laugh through her nose. "Seems plans are a funny thing lately." He ran a hand over his jaw. "Didn't mean to step into yours." She didn't answer right away, just sat down across from him. The lamplight threw shadows against his cheekbones, deep along the line of his throat. His face was still but not guarded. Tired, maybe. "You said something back there," she began, tearing her corn cake in half. "About knowing what it feels like to be left." He looked at the lamp for a moment before answering. "My brother drowned in the San Pedro 2 springs ago. Was supposed to ride with me that day. I left without him just for a few hours. When I came back, horse was grazing by the bank and his boots were still on the sand." Sylvia's hand stilled on her fork. "I'm sorry. I still look for him sometimes," Elias said. "Every time I pass that bend in the river, I half expect to see him standing there." She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. Lucy reached for another piece of cake, and Elias passed it to her without being asked. She smiled at him like she'd known him longer than she had. "You got people?" Sylvia asked after a while. "Someplace to go back to when this job's done?" "No one waiting on me," he said. "Father passed when I was a boy, mother not long after. I've been on the move since." He paused, watching her face. "You?" "My sister lives up near Prescott," she said. "But we haven't spoken since before Lucy was born. She didn't like the choices I made." Elias looked toward the girl beside him. "She's a good choice." Sylvia's throat tightened. She reached for her cup and took a sip of water. "I did most everything wrong after my husband died. Married too young, trusted too fast, thought I could fix everything just by working harder." He leaned back in the chair. "You still standing. That counts for something." They ate in quiet after that. The kind of quiet that didn't press too hard. The kind that let the house settle around them like it had been waiting for someone to claim it. After the dishes were rinsed and Liam had been carried to the pallet in the back room, Sylvia found herself on the porch. Elias followed, stepping out with his hat in his hands. The stars were coming out, slow and cautious. The moon wasn't up yet, but the sky had that deep blue glow that meant it wasn't far behind. "You sleeping on the trail tonight?" she asked, arms folded against the breeze. "I've slept on worse," he said. "You don't strike me as a man who minds discomfort. Not when I've chosen it." She hesitated. "There's space in the shed. It's dry and the roof's not too bad." He didn't answer right away. Then, "You sure? I don't offer what I don't mean." He nodded. "Then I'll take it." They stood there a while longer, listening to the creak of the windmill out back and the faint rustle of mesquite leaves. It wasn't the kind of night that demanded words. Before he stepped off the porch, he turned back to her. "I meant what I said in that chapel," he told her. "I don't say things just to be kind." Sylvia looked at him, her hands wrapped around her elbows. "I don't know what to do with something like that." "You don't have to do anything." She watched him walk toward the shed, his coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Inside, Lucy slept curled beside her brother. Sylvia sat by the window, watching the dark settle in. The torn wedding dress lay folded on the chair, threadbare lace trailing over the edge. She didn't touch it. Instead, her hand found the stitched edge of the coat sleeve, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the urge to run from morning. The morning came with a pale, yawning quiet. A coyote cried somewhere off in the breaks before dawn, and then the desert settled again, still and watchful. Sylvia stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, hair unpinned from the day before and falling in soft waves down her back. The bread she'd set on the hearthstone last night had baked through, and she was slicing it now, careful with the dull knife. She heard the shed door open, hinges creaking just once. Elias stepped onto the porch, his shirt wrinkled, hair damp from the pump. He carried his saddlebag under one arm and a small wooden box in the other. "I didn't wake the children, did I?" he asked. "They're still asleep," she said, not turning from the loaf. "Lucy kicks when she's dreaming." Woke herself up twice. He nodded and set the box on the table. Picked this up in Bisbee. Meant to trade it for supplies, but I reckon bread might be worth more. She glanced at the box, then opened it. Inside was a tin of dried apples, a coil of sewing thread, and a packet of needles. Her fingers hovered over the thread, then settled on the apples. Lucy's been asking for sweets, she said. This'll do. I can bring more next time I ride through, he said, sitting slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome to stay seated. Sylvia handed him a plate. You offering because you feel sorry for me? No, he said. I'm offering because I'd rather bring them to you than haul freight for men who don't remember my name. She didn't answer. Instead, she poured 2 tin cups of coffee, black and thin, but warm, and slid one across the table. You always that sure about things? She asked. I used to be, he said. Now I wait until they look me in the eye. She met his gaze. What do you see? He shook his head once. Not what I expected. Not what I thought I wanted. But something I don't want to walk away from. Outside, a crow called from the cottonwood near the well. The wind had picked up early, carrying fine sand across the yard. Sylvia brushed flour from her apron and stood. I got fence posts to reset before noon, she said. Last rain knocked 2 of them slantwise. I'll help, Elias said, rising. You don't need to, she said, but her voice held less resistance than the words. I know, he replied, but I want to. They crossed the yard, the light brightening against the red hills behind them. Elias carried the shovel, his coat still draped across her shoulders. The sleeves dragged past her elbows, but she hadn't taken it off. At the broken fence line, Sylvia pointed with her chin. Those 2. I tried to fix them last week, but the ground was too wet. Elias set to digging without a word. His hands worked steady, practiced, every movement clean. Sylvia watched, then fetched the posts and held them upright as he packed the earth around their base. You always do things without much talk? She asked, leaning against the fence once the second post stood firm. Talking's easy, he said, wiping his brow. Doing's harder. You think I'm easy to figure? No, he said, but I think you're honest when it matters. She looked down at her boots. One of them was cracking near the toe. I'm tired of being judged by people who only show up when there's gossip to be had, she said. Tired of pretending like I don't care. I don't care what they think, he said. Only what you do. She held his gaze a long moment, then turned back to the house. When they returned, the children were awake. Lucy had dragged a blanket to the porch and was playing with a pine cone, humming to herself. Liam sat beside her, chewing on a crust of bread. Lucy, Sylvia said, show Elias that song you made up about the lizards. Lucy grinned, then clapped her hands and sang something tuneless and bright. Elias crouched beside her, listening like it was the first time he'd heard music. Afterward, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small knife with a bone handle. You want to help me carve something? He asked her. Lucy nodded furiously, and the 2 of them settled on the steps, heads bent close. Sylvia watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You ever stay put longer than a week? She asked. Not since I was 17, Elias said without looking up. But I might if I had a reason. She studied the way he handed Lucy the knife, guiding her fingers with patience. How he didn't rush or take over, just let her learn. And something shifted in her chest. Not sudden, not loud, just a quiet recognition, like finding a path you hadn't known you were walking. That afternoon, she hung the wedding dress on the line behind the house. The lace still torn, the hem still stained. But the wind lifted it gently, and the sun made the satin shine like new. She didn't look back at it again. Inside, Elias was showing Liam how to fold paper into small shapes. Lucy perched on the table, watching them both. Sylvia stepped in and shut the door behind her. The light slanted through the window, catching dust in gold ribbons. "You planning to leave in the morning?" she asked. "I was," he said. "But I'll stay if you ask." She walked to the table, took Liam into her arms, and brushed his hair from his forehead. Then she looked at Elias. "I'm asking." He nodded once, the corners of his mouth softening. "I'll stay." The wind brought the scent of rain late in the afternoon. Not the sharp bite of a storm, but the distant kind, where damp earth and juniper hang on the air before the clouds ever show. Elias stood in the north pasture, measuring the lean of the fence under his palm. His shirt clung to his back, damp with work, and his hat hung on the post beside him. Sylvia approached with a pail in each hand, her steps sure across the brittle grass. She wore a calico skirt that brushed her ankles and a woven shawl knotted at her chest. The fabric sun faded at the shoulders. "You missed supper," she said, setting the pails near the rail. "I wasn't hungry yet," he answered, eyes still on the crooked post. "That how you usually eat?" "Only when something reminds you to." He looked over at her, the edge of a smile just touching his mouth. "Only when someone does." She crouched and dipped her hand in the pail, testing the water level. "You always this quiet when you're getting close to finishing a job?" "Only when I'm thinking about what comes after." Sylvia leaned against the post beside him. "And what do you reckon comes after this?" He didn't answer for a moment. The wind moved through the grass in long, low swells. "I've worked ranches where you sleep under the stars and forget the shape of a roof," he said. "Other places, I stayed long enough to know a man's name and nothing else. But I've never had a place where the fence line mattered to me." She studied his face, the way his jaw shifted when he looked out across the land. "You think you'd stay if the fence stood straight?" she asked. "I think I'd stay for the hands that built it." Sylvia's breath caught, not from surprise, but from how quiet the words were, like they didn't need to be said loud to carry weight. "Children asked about you this morning," she said, changing the subject. "Lucy wanted to know if you knew how to make a slingshot, and Liam followed me around asking when you'd come back inside." "I can show her," he said, "and carve him one, if you've got the right branch. They've taken to you quicker than I expected." "I'm not going anywhere." Sylvia nodded, slowly. "I know." They walked the length of the fence together, checking each post for rot, the wire for slack. She didn't speak much after that, and he didn't press her. They worked until the light faded and the sky turned that deep, worn purple that meant night was near. Back at the house, the children were asleep in the front room, the fire in the stove banked low. Sylvia poured hot water into a basin and brought it to the table, setting it beside a folded cloth. "You've got dirt on your neck," she said, tugging one of the chairs out. He sat without argument, and she dipped the cloth, wringing it out. Her hands were careful, warm, steady. She wiped along his jaw, behind his ear, across the bridge of his nose. He sat still, eyes closed, like he couldn't remember the last time someone had done a thing like that for him. "You don't flinch," she said. "I trust your hands." She rinsed the cloth and worked down the side of his throat. Her knuckles brushed the collar of his shirt, and something shifted between them, not sudden, but definite. "I never thought I'd be here," she said, voice low. "Not after him. Not after everything. You don't have to say it." "I want to." He opened his eyes. "I was scared," she said. "Still am some days. Not of being alone. I got used to that. But of being wrong again. Of choosing someone who couldn't carry the weight with me. I don't leave when it gets heavy." She looked at him, then really looked. And he didn't look away. "I know," she said. She folded the cloth and laid it beside the basin. Neither of them spoke. Outside, The first drops of rain hit the roof, soft and spaced apart like they were asking permission. Elias stood and reached for her hand. "You want me to sleep in the shed tonight?" She shook her head. "No," he touched her cheek. "Just once." The corner of his thumb brushing the ridge of her temple. "I'll see to the horses," he said. "You check the windows." She nodded. And when he returned, the lantern still burned low in the front room, and she was waiting by the fire. The rain passed in the night, leaving behind a hush that clung to the earth. The next morning, the air smelled of wet creosote and ashwood smoke. The sky was pale, the kind of soft and colorless that made the world feel like it hadn't fully woken. Elias stood by the open barn doors, running a comb through the mare's mane. His sleeves were rolled again, and his boots sank a little in the softened ground. Sylvia watched him from the porch, a tin cup warming her fingers. She hadn't said much after he'd come back inside the night before, but she'd kept her eyes on him like she was learning something new. By midday, Lucy had coaxed a song from an old fiddle kept in a trunk behind Sylvia's bedstead, the bow worn nearly through, but still usable. Her elbow stuck out as she dragged it across the strings, the notes jagged and uncertain. Elias listened without correcting her, only nodding now and then when she found a sound that held. "She's not afraid to try," he said as Sylvia carried in a basket of washed linens, damp from the rain but clean. "She doesn't know yet that she should be," she answered, setting the basket on the chair. "I want to keep it that way as long as I can." Elias stepped forward, lifting a wet sheet from the pile. "You're always working." "I have to," she said. "But I don't mind." "You ever sit just to sit?" "When the children are grown, maybe." He shook the sheet out and helped her hang it across the rope line strung between porch posts. The fabric was heavy with moisture, and their hands brushed as they clipped it into place. Neither pulled away. "When I was a boy," Elias said, "I used to think I'd end up in California. Thought the ocean would be something worth chasing." "You still think so?" "I think the best things I've found weren't the ones I went looking for." Sylvia looked at him then, her eyes steady. "You ever wish you'd found them sooner?" "I don't think I'd have been ready." She nodded, quiet for a moment. "Some nights I lie awake thinking about how much of myself I wasted on people who didn't stay." "You didn't waste it," he said. "You just didn't have anyone strong enough to carry it with you." Lucy called from inside, asking for more rosin for the bow. Sylvia turned toward the door, but Elias stopped her with a hand on her arm. "I've been thinking," he said. "I've got some money put aside. Not much, but enough to buy a few head of cattle and lease some grazing land if I stay close." She waited. "I could build here," he continued. "Put up another room. Something for the children. Maybe a lean-to for the wagon. I can work sunup to sundown, if I know who I'm working for." Sylvia's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the way her heart twisted in her chest. "You'd stay here?" she asked. "Not just for a season? I'd stay for good." She stepped closer, close enough that her skirt brushed his knee. "I don't need promises," she said. "I just need to know you'll keep walking toward me, even when it gets hard." "I'll walk beside you," he said, "every day, no matter what comes." She reached up and touched the side of his face, her hand rough from work but sure. "Then I'll build with you. Not just the house. A life." He leaned in, slow, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. But she didn't. Their foreheads touched first, then their lips, and it wasn't hurried or shy, just something long overdue. When they parted, her hand stayed on his chest. Inside, Lucy struck a sour note and burst into laughter. Liam crowed in response, chasing her barefoot across the floor. Sylvia laughed, too. Later that week, they hired a neighbor boy to watch the children for the afternoon while Elias and Sylvia rode into town. She wore a cotton dress stitched years ago for Sundays, and he wore a clean shirt with the collar pressed flat. They stopped at the courthouse, signed their names in ink, and left with a paper folded into her pocket. No one in Redwater whispered this time. Some nodded. One woman offered a handful of bluebonnets from her garden, and Sylvia carried them home in her lap. Elias built the extra room before the cold set in. Sylvia made quilts from scraps she'd saved for years. They planted a fig tree behind the well. Come spring, it bloomed. He taught Liam how to saddle a pony and taught Lucy how to fire a slingshot straight. Sylvia taught Elias to read by lamplight, tracing each letter with her finger until he could make sense of the words himself. He never liked sitting still, but for her, he'd stay at that table until the flame burned low. They never spoke again of the chapel or the dress, or the man who'd left her standing there. It didn't matter anymore. Each day began with coffee over the stove and ended with quiet talk on the porch. Sometimes, they danced barefoot in the kitchen when the children were asleep and the fire burned low. He held her like she was something he'd never get tired of carrying, and she leaned into him like she finally understood what it felt like to be kept. They grew old in that house. The fence never did fall again. And every night, before the lamp was turned down, Elias brushed her hair back and said the same thing he'd said that first morning on the porch, only this time she believed it in her bones. "I'm not going anywhere," and he never did.